On today's special episode of Survival Dispatch News, we're discussing recent events in Israel and what we can learn as far as protecting ourselves from terrorist attacks with retired Navy SEAL Don Mann. And we're back with SEAL Team 6 All-American Badass Don Mann. Don, how are you?
Hey, good, Chris. How you doing?
Doing good. Sorry to interrupt your training, by the way.
Oh, this is it's good to see you, and it's good to be back on your show.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So, on today's special episode of Survival Dispatch News, we're going to discuss what's happened in Israel, at least what we know of what's happened in Israel, what the likelihood is of those types of events happening here, and what our audience can learn from that to best prepare themselves. So, we had a short conversation offline, and our audience typically when we poll them, has told us that they have sources for international news. So we won't go too far down that rabbit hole, but it seems to me that this was either, a massive intelligence fail or it was orchestrated. I mean, give me your quick thoughts on that before we go into the specifics.
Chris, I'm having a hard time accepting the fact that it could have been that massive of an intel failure. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, have an incredible intelligence agency. Israel has an incredible intel agency. We have 16 intelligence agencies. I really don't understand how it possibly could be Gaza Strip is able to plan this complex mission, getting all this training and weapons and advice from Iran, all that traffic going back and forth, the weapons coming back and forth, and for us to miss it. And another thing is, on a holiday, I've been overseas for a lot of holidays, especially like dates like 9/11. That's when your preparation and your alertness is the highest, because you think we're going to be hit, because terrorists love to use significant dates to do their attacks. And the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War, I mean, that's a significant date. And for them to have their guard down and to be asleep at the wheel, I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe a terrorist organization like Hamas and Hezbollah up north can attack Israel without any warning. With Israel not knowing it was going to come in. Something's beyond that, I believe.
So, I mean, clearly you're a subject matter expert when it comes to things like intelligence and these sort of things, and I'm not. But from, call it a layman's perspective, I'm having deja vu over weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and mysteriously now, less than 24 hours after the initial attack, the Wall Street Journal is reporting anonymous sources, just like they did with the WMDs, that this whole thing was orchestrated by Iran. And it smells fishy to me,
Yep. I do believe, I think everybody believes Iran is behind it all, of course, with the funding and they've been behind Hezbollah and Hamas. They are the primary. If there wasn't Iran, there wouldn't be Hezbollah or Hamas, of course.
Yeah. So, but my point really is that we just found this out immediately after the attack. That's where I'm seeing the disconnect, is that,
yeah.
These anonymous sources came forward. I'm having a hard time swallowing that. But anyway, let's move on to the content that our audience does appreciate, which is the prospect of this sort of attack happening domestically and what they can do to prepare themselves. So I'll preface that by saying I think it's pretty safe to say that thanks to Obama and Biden and our wide open southern border, that we have sleeper cells here. No ifs, ands, or buts. And when you see people in New York City, demonstrating, supporting the Palestinians, supporting Hamas, and holding their phones up with Nazi insignia on them, I don't think it's a stretch to say that we've been infiltrated. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I believe we have. I know we have. I know in the 90s we knew there were at least 200 sleeper cells in the U.S. here. We were going after these sleeper cells and that's when the border was a lot tighter than it is now. Now we have this completely open border with floods of people coming in, people who hate us and want to take away our way of life. there's something going on that's behind the scenes that we don't understand. How can we have members of Congress be ahead of these protests and protesting against the Israeli population and protesting in behalf of what Hamas just did or the Palestinian people? I don't understand how we allow that. I don't understand how the U.S. why when Obama was in presidency, when he was our president, the administration, how he got away with sending those billions of dollars to Iran, and then in the middle of the night finding all those billions of dollars on pallets on aircraft, and they said, well, we couldn't send money electronically, it wasn't working, and we owed this back from the 70s.
Right.
And then they found out they were sending money electronically too. If that was the truth, why did they have to? If the truth was they owed that money from the old arms deal in the 70s, why didn't they just do it overtly? But they had to sneak it under the radar so American people didn't know we were sending all this money to Iran. And now with the oil and the gas prices, and Obama just, I mean, Biden just releasing the $6 billion last week to Iran.
Hey, listen, you
Why
got
are
it.
we supporting Iran?
You got it right the first time. Obama's on record saying that he would kill to have a third term where he could have a puppet in front of him that he could pull the person's strings.
Got it.
Let's be clear. This is Obama's third term that we're currently witnessing. And it's his people, Susan Rice, Eric Holder, the whole cabal of these, seditionists, for lack of a better term, that are running this current administration. But suffice it to say, we've got sleeper cells, that's a safe assumption, right?
And I would say, Chris, it's so we start off in the 90s. We knew we had 200 back then. Borders are wide open now. And now our agencies, our intel agencies, we can't trust them anymore. They're corrupted. They've been weaponized.
Mm-hmm.
We don't even know. We might never know how many sleeper cells we have in the U.S. or where they are or anything about them. We don't even hear the word anymore. It's not even discussed in the news anymore.
So I want to talk about the distribution of guns to citizens in Israel right now. The IDF is distributing guns to, people in the outlying areas. But before we go into that, the conspiracy theorist is going to come out here in me. I listened to Wayne Lapierre for years say that the Second Amendment protects the First Amendment. Well, I come from big tech, and I'm here to tell you that big tech and mainstream media destroyed the First Amendment 20 years ago. And I'm not a fan of Wayne Lapierre whatsoever. However, what the Second Amendment is the firewall between freedom and globalism, because we're the last man standing. So I personally believe that the agenda behind all of this, which you alluded to, is that if America is weakened to the point where they can take our guns, take over the government like they've clearly done right now, that will get them one step closer to their dream of having a one world government, and they're pushing that through the UN, the World Health Organization, and the list goes on and on. So with that being said, they don't have a Second Amendment in Israel or any type of rights similar to that in Israel. So gun ownership is extremely low in Israel. Yes, that there's mandatory training and serving at a young age, but suffice it to say, your average person doesn't have guns in Israel, right? So, from somebody who's been in combat situations, you would know better than anybody that number one, shooting is a perishable skill, and number two, if you're not frequently training, there go the bubbles again. I don't get it. Every time I put my fingers up, Zoom wants to put bubbles across the screen. I mean, I can repeat it by doing this. And it just made a liar out of me. Anyway, point being is that seems like an exercise in futility to give people guns and to tell them to protect themselves when they have no training. They haven't been practicing with firearms. So give me your quick thoughts on that.
Well, I have worked with the IDF, Israeli Defense Forces. I've been in Israel. I worked with them in Israel, and I've been with them in other places around the world. And I can't tell you the respect I have for them. I mean, and the other thing is in Israel, you have to serve your country. So a lot of the people, even when they serve and then they get out, they're trained on weapons. I am a firm believer. I totally believe this time in our country's history, and I hate to say it like this, but we can't trust our government anymore. We can't. Right. We find day in and day out how corrupt our own government is, I don't want to sound political or anything, but Trump, thank God for Trump that he brought it out, and he brought out and showing how corrupt our justice and intel agencies are. So we can't trust them. Um, I'll give you my own feeling. I will never ever give up my guns, because that we have to assume we could be the last man standing. For the Israelis, for them not to have weapons, they're surrounded by enemy. They are surrounded by enemy. There's attacks every single day in Israel. And with Netanyahu coming back into power, things are tightening up. I know they're tightening up. But those poor Israelis right now, they've been under threat from day one. Day one, 47, they've been under threat, and they have to defend themselves. Things are going to change over there. So they've got a strong military. It's not a big military, but they got a strong military. They have our assistance, thank God. They have our assistance. But the people who have to protect themselves, they need weapons, and they need a form to protect themselves more so than we do. But I think they're a good example of what can happen to us in the very short-term future. I think what Israel's going through right now, it could happen here in the U.S. Our borders are wide open, and it's not just Hamas and Hezbollah and those things. We have so many other organizations and small cells around this world who want to end our way of life. We and Israel need to protect ourselves, not to mention the rest of the world. But
yeah, so my point out of all of that, though, is the same thing that we discuss frequently on Survival Dispatch with our audience, is that, buying guns and, going once or twice to the range, buying guns and shooting full metal jacket, then putting your EDC ammo in. None of this is incredibly effective as far as defending yourself, right? Like Mike Glover recently said on one of our episodes that try shooting when your heart rate's 140, 150 beats per minute, and let's see how accurate you are. And that he's seen people in very close quarters, couldn't hit the side of a barn, because the stress level was so high and whatnot. So my point really is that, yeah, it's a good thing that the Israelis, the IDF, are giving their citizens guns to protect themselves. But I think a lot of those people they have no training, no practice, and they're up against an enemy who's had plenty of training and plenty of practice. And so I don't know that that's a really effective strategy. I think you got to go a whole layer deeper than that, which is again why we preach to our audience. You would be better off buying one or two guns, ammunition, a plate carrier, night vision, than having a safe full of guns. And going to the range occasionally, add all those force multipliers in, plus the training. You got to have the training, and it's perishable. You got to do it on a regular basis.
I can't tell you the number of CIA, U.S. Marshals, SEALs, Rangers, Delta Force members I've worked with over the years. I could give you cases in each of those organizations where people have holes in their legs, have been shot or shot other people accidentally. Now, law enforcement, especially, law enforcement, that's one that really breaks my heart. And the reason is because of training. Law enforcement, you hear these accidents, accidental discharges, negligent discharge, when a cop takes a shot and he shouldn't have. And he's given 1 second, a millisecond to think about. Shoot or don't shoot, live or die. He's got that life or death situation right there. And oftentimes they make mistakes. Anybody would in those situations. And to be able to just be on a shooting range and shoot, bam, 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 your heart rate's 90 or something like that. It doesn't work. You have to have some very stressful training. Ron Avery, who used to be the second best shot in the world, we would train with him. And what Ron would do, he'd start on top of a hill, come sprinting down the road. There'd be 2 racks of 6 head plates, 6 head plates here, 6 head plates here. He'd grab his weapon, pivot, boom, 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 holster with his heart rate maxed out. And by the time he's holstered, the last plate has just fallen. And he stresses, and we do too. You can't just stay on a static range. That's good for sighting your weapons, getting your basic stance, grip, sight picture, and all that under control. But then it can't be the static shooting. It's got to be dynamic movement. It's got to be realistic. It's got to be realistic. Realistic training breaks that forebrain resistance that we all have. That if that's not broken, you're going to be not, it's not going to be instinctual for you to pull a weapon on somebody and pull the trigger. You've got to break that forebrain resistance, and that breaks with realistic training when you're shooting moving targets that are threats.
Yeah, I mean,
and they know it better than we do.
Yeah, our mutual friend Mike Sterling, who's been deployed multiple times, retired now. He likes to refer to it as stress inoculation. So one of the, as you know, I do a lot of run and gun training, dry fire training and whatnot. And Mike had mentioned that they'd done some training for the Atlanta PD, and they were shooting them in the ankle with an airsoft gun, to try and distract them during this training exercise. So we thought we would replicate something like that. And I had Denny shoot me in the back with an airsoft gun, and wasn't the smartest decision I ever made. Took layers of skin off my back, but valid point on Mike's part. But the other thing that Mike also states is that human beings never rise to the occasion. They fall to their level of training. Yeah. So I mean, we've got a bunch of bullets to touch on here as far as what we can learn from this horrible situation in Israel. But at the end of the day, train some more, and don't expect that you're going to mysteriously, just rise to the occasion. Don't expect that the enemy is going to give you a chance to catch your breath because you're fat and out of shape and so on and so forth. Right. So let's look at, like you said, this is a sophisticated attack, right? Air, land, and sea. And, one of the most horrific parts of the attack was the music festival in southern Israel. And it seems to me, well, just a quick recap on that, right? So we've got hundreds of people killed, confirmed that we know of. We've got, women raped and murdered. We've got bodies being paraded in public and across the internet. And so it seems to me like this is like a terrorist wet dream, right? Like to be able to attack people that are concentrated in an area. Like we've heard for years that something like the Super Bowl, would be, kind of like a super high goal for our enemies, that sort of thing. So give me your input on, you've got a captive audience in a location for a festival, a show, event, or whatever. What do people do when if you get caught in that situation? Because here's another thing that comes to mind. Any music festival here domestically, they're going to have metal detectors. They're going to be patting people down. I mean, we've gone to a ton of concerts since 9/11, and heck, I can't even get in with a pocket knife anymore. So give me your advice. Give our audience your advice.
It wasn't very long ago. I was just in Vegas the week prior to that when we had a shooter shooting down at a country music festival, and he shot all the people down below. One of the worst mass shootings in our country's history. And he got a lot of weapons up there.
Yeah. So we're supposed to believe that one man hauled all of those guns and ammo up there and managed to remove an 800-pound commercial window to shoot those victims all by himself, because that's what the glass weighed. That glass panel was not shot out. It was removed. And that's an 800-pound commercial window. So sorry to diverge there, but that whole situation was complete and utter bullshit.
Well, I guess my only point on that was that he did have an audience down below.
Sure.
And whoever it was up there, or whatever the shooters were, it is like a small example of what could happen in the Super Bowl or any concert or parade. And that is a terrorist dream,
Point taken.
And how do you stop it? How do you stop something like that? The metal detectors, Israel has had metal detectors for years. Everywhere. You can't even get in a school there without a metal detector. And I know we're trying to follow their lead because we have to. Our situations here are getting so bad. So the points are, the biggest point I can stress on this, Chris, is situational awareness. First of all, we can't be just like accepting that we're going to be protected. The police do everything they can, but they clean up afterwards, after the shooting takes place. We can't rely on the police to stop an attack from happening. An attack happens, You protect yourself, then you call the police. It goes in that order. The police aren't going to be right there. Security won't be right there.
You got the average national response time for the cops is 12 minutes. So you are your own first responder, right? Let's talk a little bit more on situational awareness in a large crowd, though, because we frequently discuss situational awareness. And then we try to give examples. Like, here's a simple one. Myself, I was a bouncer in my younger years. Because I got to watch free bands and stuff. It was fun, other than all the fights. But when I go to a restaurant, I sit with my back against the wall, have a purview of everybody who's there, the escape routes, the whole 9 yards. You can call it paranoia if you want. I call it situational awareness. But beyond paying attention to just the XY axis, paying attention to the Z axis as well, which most people don't do. And then in this instance, the guys came in on the paragliders, Z axis, looking up. Don't just look sideways. Pay attention to what's going on overhead of you as well. How can they be situationally aware in a large crowd? Like, what are your recommendations for people and find themselves in that situation?
Well, just that one piece of advice you say that you do, keep your back to the wall. I mean, yeah, I do that all the time. And people say, why do you do that? It's not a problem doing that. I like to see who's around. I know there's nobody behind me, and I can see the doors, and I can look for suspicious people. A guy and a wife with 2 kids, to me, most likely wouldn't be suspicious. Other people can look more suspicious. It's much, much harder to do in a 3-dimensional world, and you are where there are placements where people could be launched above you, in a Super Bowl situation, a concert down below with buildings and hotels all around you. Yeah, the opportunities for snipers or to be attacked from above is real, and you really can't know what's going on above you in that situation. But you can be aware of where the doors are and where the exits are. And is there a lot of commotion going on over there? Why is all that commotion going on? And you can keep an eye on the situational awareness, of course.
That's a great point, Don. So maybe in like these larger venues, concerts, whatever the case may be, position yourself in close proximity to an exit. Don't be caught in the middle of the herd, sort of thing.
Yeah. And that holds true. And for instance, even in the animal kingdom, if you're out in the middle of the woods or the jungle or somewhere, and there's a lot of movement, all of a sudden, all the birds are moving us, at one time, something's happening over there that most people won't know until it reaches closer to you. It's the same in large crowds. If someone comes out with a weapon, or a group of people come out, and you're in a concert or an arena or a stadium situation, there's going to be a lot of movement over there. And if you have the situational awareness, and you're scanning, and you're not paranoid, like you said, you're not scared to death, but you're just aware. Cooper's colors. You're just aware. Hey, there's some movement over there. Okay, yep. Okay, I'm conditioned yellow. I'm going to condition orange. If something happens, I know my exit is here. If that exit's blocked, I'm just gonna make my way over here, because there's another exit over here.
So the I guess popular response to this stuff that is propagated by people who are in favor of these gun-free zones is that, run, duck, and hide sort of thing. And I think of the Orlando nightclub massacre a few years back, where a bunch of patrons went and hid in the restroom, and they all got killed. I'm not a big fan of the hide thing. I would rather get out of Dodge as fast as I could. What are your thoughts on that? Like, what would you do if you found yourself in that situation?
What I don't like about the hide philosophy is you don't get to see what's going on. If you're hiding, you don't necessarily see what's going on out there. I like to keep my eyes open, my ears open, and my senses alert. I don't like to hide. I do like to de-escalate and get off the X as quickly as possible. And I sound like broken record, to know what's going on in your surroundings. You won't always know, but at least if you're near an exit, you have a plan to go. I would like to mention one thing. You were talking about training, that with the Israelis not really having the opportunity to train on the weapons and everything. I mentioned Ron Avery a little while ago. Well, he taught me something very interesting. He was the second fastest shooter in the world. And then he had an operation on his hand and he couldn't shoot for like 6 months.
Okay.
And the power of visualization. And what Ron did, and of course, we take both our hands at one time, pivot the weapon out of the holster, bring it up, come up, put your eyes on the sights and shoot and scan, and it's all, robotic. So at Ron's level, there's that plus 30 other steps that happen that most people don't even see. Ron
Right.
understands it. Top level shooters see it. Ron told me he was in the hospital. His arm was operated on. He couldn't shoot for months. But through visualization, and this works through training, this goes back to the Israelis and people anywhere, but I'd like to bring it out because of Americans. We could visualize the way Ron did. Ron became a better shooter after not shooting, visualizing all those steps. He visualized all the steps he had to do. And in his mind, he visualized how he can get faster and better. And he visualized all these competitions he was in and winning all of them. He went back to shooting and he was faster and better than before his injury without shooting, all through the power of visualization. So visualization as an athlete, I've used it many, many times. Going through buds, I've used it. For instance, going through buds, I've mentioned this to you before, I believe, but going through buds, I visualized how hard every day would be. Every day was easier than I visualized it. So if you can visualize a situation to be much, much worse than it is. And when it occurs, oh yeah, I'll do that. Stress inoculation. We do it as combat medics. You have these people with moulage and bleeding and screaming, and you do that over and over and over. Now, when you come up to a mass shooting or a helicopter crash, and there are people who are really banged up, it's not as stressful because you've inoculated yourself. And the same with shooting and these tactics we're talking about, or just the situational awareness is, oh my God. I was in a situation in Serbia once, and we were at a soccer game. I was with the government, and they took 6 of us up to the stadium, and Serbia was at war. Okay, so we're watching a Serbian soccer game, and the place broke out into a riot. Serbian armed SWAT team members surrounded the field. The players were inside there, and they had the shields and dogs and weapons up at the audience, and they had to get us out of there quickly. We got in this car, and all the Serbs, they started rocking our car. We were thinking we were going to be slaughtered. What happened is the football players, the soccer players, starting fighting among each other. That was the situation was escalating right there. We all knew something had to go. We had to do something different. Then the crowd started breaking their chairs and throwing it into the audience. We should have been well off the X before that. And by the time we got off the X, we were just minutes before catastrophe. But a situation like that was in a stadium, and the place did go crazy, and people were killed. And they didn't want Americans there either. So that was a situation I was in where it could have got really, really bad. And we did see what was going on, and we got out, but almost not in time.
So just a couple quick things for our audience who haven't seen you before. BUDS is essentially underwater demolition training for SEALs.
Yes, yeah, it's what you have to go through to become a SEAL. It's the hardest, most challenging military training in the world.
Okay. With regards to visualization, the body follows the mind. Incredibly powerful. So, I competed for years, on a professional level in powerlifting. And, whether it was a national or world championship that I was training for, it's a 12-week process. And during that 12-week training cycle, every single day, it was, playing in my head over and over and over again. So if you think you can't do something, you won't do it. If you think you can do something, it's not a guarantee that you will be able to do it, but your chances rise exponentially. So I like the stuff on visualization. Before we move past large venues, so I think it's safe to say our advice to our audience is that if you're at a large venue, strategically place yourself near an exit so that you can get out of Dodge as quick as possible if and when the shit hits the fan. I would add to that as well is that if you can get there early and park your car closer, That gives you a secondary means of egress, as well as the fact that you probably have, some self-defense weapons in your car that you can get to a little bit faster. And then on top of that, these things. These are weapons of mass distraction. Uh, don't have your face buried in your phones when you're in public, especially in a large venue where things can literally change in the blink of an eye. Those are my takeaways as far.
Yeah.
And we can pretty much say for sure that we have sleeper cells present. They want to inflict maximum damage to us, which means that, much like the music festival in Israel, there's a high probability that they'll try and hit some sort of event venue. So in addition to those types of venues, where else, where are soft spots? Where is it most likely that you would see a domestic attack happen?
Unfortunately, schools, universities, schools,
Okay.
parades, holiday festivals, when they are celebrating some holiday with as large groups of people. As we know, a lot of people are going in cars and running through large crowds of people in New York City and big cities like that.
So I think you just hit the nail on the head, because I've been thinking on this topic for the past day and change. Areas where there's a high concentration of people, which
Yeah.
therefore makes them a high value target.
Yep. And with a large concentration of people, it's usually a city, and cities are filled with people from all over the world. And a lot of places throughout the world come people who don't want us to live the way we live. And for them to attack us, it's a win on them, and it's what they're here for. Not to say they're in a sleeper cell, but they could be. But when you are in New York City, you can look around, and you can, if you see 100 people in one glance, you could pretty much make a good bet that not all those 100 people are good pro-Americans.
Right.
It's not like that anymore, unfortunately. And
So, well, I mean, you just mentioned, these people don't have good intentions. They want to inflict as much pain as possible. And I think if we look at the sophistication of the ISIS videos from years gone by, where they were executing people by slitting their throats on camera and, publishing that around the world. Now we've seen in Israel, there, naked bodies being paraded around and broadcast on the internet and social media and whatnot. I personally feel that the prospect of that happening here is much higher, because it's psychological warfare, for lack of a better term. And I think we'll see things like, we their MO of being suicide bombers is still in play, but it's still towards the same end, where they want maximum exposure, maximum coverage, and maximum amount of effect on people's, mindset, scare the shit out of Americans, because that's a win for them right there. Look at the travesty that we have with the TSA. We've got 80-year-old women being shaken down by TSA agents. That's not the person who's bombing a plane, for crying out loud. So they've got to be laughing their asses off at what they were able to accomplish through 9/11 and all the subsequent things, where we've become hostages to our own system, which it's from clown world or something. Every time I see, there was a gentleman who was a vet, missing 3 limbs in a wheelchair last week. And the TSA basically strip searched him in front of an entire crowd. Right. So you got an American vet who lost 3 limbs, is in a wheelchair, and we're going to focus on that. That's how you miss the big stuff happening, in my opinion. You want to concentrate on grandmas protesting at abortion clinics. You want to hassle people at TSA checkpoints, and you're not even looking at the whatever you want to call it, the profile of the people who are seriously going to commit these crimes. It's a travesty. They won in that regard. They won.
They sure did. Israel used to make fun of us. They'd say, "What is wrong with you guys? Why are you checking people like that?" You know, and then you could only and I don't want to pinpoint any nationality or anything, but if you saw 3 people from the Middle East, they were only allowed to check 1 out of 4. So the people from the Middle East who were coming in, and maybe for nefarious reasons, they would go 3 at a time because they know they couldn't be checked. And the random searches, Israel used to look at us as, well, you guys don't know what you're doing. Yeah, your rules are holding you back. Your rules are handcuffing you. But look what just happened to them too. But we do some really stupid things in this country.
It,
My God, it's hard to say that, but we do some really, really stupid things in this country. The rules we're making, the regulations, the people we put into office.
yeah,
I mean, Chris, I've been involved now, military and government now for over 45 years. I have never, ever, ever witnessed an enemy, known about an enemy, read about an enemy, faced an enemy who's done more destruction to our country than our own people are doing to our country.
right.
I mean, our far left and our left in general, people like, it goes back to Clinton, but Obama and Biden, there's something much, much deeper than them funding the terrorists who are trying to kill us. There's something that we're not being told. And we're not being told a lot of things. The more time goes on, the more we learn. We're not being told all the more. And now with all these agencies being weaponized, there's something big going on. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist either. And I'm not paranoid, but I am smart enough to know something big is going on in this country. And it's underneath, it's undercover, and we don't know what it is, and we don't know why, unless there is the big reset in action, and there is the big, the new coming, and that is destroy everything we have, and let's build back up from scratch. It's the only thing that makes sense to me of what's happening here, and you can't trust it. You can't just be the lemming following along with the people in the news, because there's more going on than what we're being told in the news. And what's going on in Israel, if it can happen in Israel, my
Yeah.
God, it can happen here. And we have to be aware of that.
Best case scenario, what the mainstream media puts out is infotainment, but the bulk of what they put out is actually propagandatainment. Think back, to the early 80s, there was something like 400 or 500 independent news organizations in the country. Now you've got 5 or 6 media conglomerates that own 99% of the media. They're just, they're a mouthpiece for their masters. And the masters are the same ones who've bought and paid for their Congress critters as well. How do you serve in Congress on $174,000 a year? That number hasn't changed in many years, like Dianne Feinstein, and retire with over $100 million in real estate, a $62 million jet, so on and so forth. That's a whole other rabbit hole that we can go down. But just to get back on topic here, and really the key is for us at Survival Dispatch is try to, hopefully provide some information to our audience that will prove to save their life, or increase their odds of saving their life. I've got a handful of bullets, and I'm just going to rip them off, and then I'd like you to counter the ones that really, kind of strike a chord with you. But personally, I feel like you should never leave home unarmed, that you should always have a backup weapon. Don't patronize gun-free venues or businesses if at all possible. Have a family plan, self-defense plan for both home as well as in public, so that everybody's got their head wrapped around it, and you can practice that. Train with your weapons on a regular basis. It doesn't do you any good, to just buy guns and go to the range. But when you do go to the range, don't swap out your EDC ammo for full metal jacket to save a few cents per round. Full metal jacket and higher quality EDC rounds, there's a huge difference in their behavior, huge difference in muzzle flip, how fast you can get the gun back on target, those sort of things. Spend the extra money to shoot. It's a basic premise in the athletic world, right? Practice the way you're going to play, sort of thing.
And how you fight. Yeah.
Get professional weapons training, especially the moving targets and moving yourself with an elevated heart rate, some form of stress inoculation. And this next point, is the number one reason that the majority of preppers will die if the shit really hits the fan. Improve your station in life as it comes to your health. So if you eat processed garbage food and you don't exercise, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. You're not going to survive SHTF no matter how much money you've spent on all this, latest and greatest gear and whatnot. Um, Another point I think is just common sense. I'm not a drinker, I'm not a drug user, but don't get intoxicated in public. Man, it makes you a really easy target. And don't go out alone after dark. Make sure that you always have somebody with you if it's after dark. So those are kind of like the bullets that
Yeah.
I put together. Let's hear your
I like
thoughts on them
those,
before
Chris.
we wrap up, Don.
I like them all. The one thing about it doesn't have anything to do with guns or anything, but what you said about eating and staying healthy, um, and processed foods. Right now, I've been watching some studies and listening to some doctors on videos, and they're explaining, like, for cancers, all the types of cancers, obesity, cardiac issues. Now cancer is overtaking cardiac issues as number one cause for death for men. But they're doing these studies that there's places in Africa and places in remote parts of the world where people don't eat processed foods and they're outside working all the time and they literally don't have any cancers at all. And now they've always worked and studied cancer like it's a gene defect. But now it's no, the cancer's in there, and it's basically the more processed foods, the more obese people get, the more their bodies and cells are open to cancer. And you can starve out cancers now. Now, the big pharma doesn't like it because they're not making any money on all the drugs they sell. But you
Correct.
can starve out cancer by cutting out all the processed foods, cutting out all the sugars, and the cancer cells die. And they're finding this overwhelming evidence in starving out cancer cells rather than chemo and radiation, that it's deadly. A lot of times, yeah, well, you got rid of this little cancer I heard, but you blew out my whole liver. My liver's gone now. And that's what's happening. The chemo and radiation are very, very toxic ways to get rid of cancer. But now, if you can stay healthy and exercise, even if people say they don't like it, going for a half-hour walk is fun. That's exercise. And
Yep.
and getting your body down so it's leaner, and staying away from anything packaged. Those processed foods and sugars feed cancer. They feed cancer cells.
Hmm.
Sugar, cancer cannot exist without sugar. And if you think about that, yeah, okay, so I got to stop having sugar. Um, so I really, really believe in trying to stay fit and watch what we eat. And we have some of the worst diet in the world here in the U.S. And it's all mass produced and everything. Just it's all to make money. And then the drug companies have we're the most over medicated country in the world too.
Well, we don't have healthcare. We have sick care. We have a system that's predicated on taking advantage of people and putting them into the medical industrial complex and billing as much as we possibly can so that companies can make insane profits. You just hit on a whole bunch of stuff that I'd like to address before we wrap up this video. Uh, so we have PFAS forever chemicals in our water. We have it in our food. Animals have eaten contaminated stuff. The chemicals end up existing in them. So forever chemicals have no health half-life, pardon me, they never go away. Okay. Somewhere around 80% of our municipal water supplies and 50% of private wells are contaminated with forever chemicals. These are highly carcinogenic chemicals, and typically the only reliable way to get them out is to use reverse osmosis. A lot of bottled water comes from city supplies, so it's full of all the PFAS chemicals as well. This is an issue that hits close to home for my wife and I. We have 2 dogs currently with cancer. We have another dog that died of cancer. For the past several years, we've had this ongoing conversation with our vet, who's a close personal friend, and we've been saying there's something in the water here in Ormond Beach, Florida, that's causing this. He's like, no, it's the breed. Pit bulls are prone, to getting mast cell tumors and seromas and all that kind of stuff. And so we've had 3 surgeries on 2 dogs in the past 7 weeks or so, many thousands of dollars. So when we went back for the consult for the very first of those 3 surgeries, and these dogs have had prior surgeries to remove tumors, it's not the first go around. I said to our vet, I said, I want you to look at my phone. I've got some information for you. And so Environmental Working Group's been around for 30 years. EWG.org is the website. You can punch your zip code in and you can see what's in your water. We've got some PFAS chemicals that are 300-400 times the safe level here in Ormond Beach. EPA sets the threshold here, but in reality, we know that the threshold's actually way below that for danger and whatnot. And I gave it to Will, our vet, and he looked at me and he said, Chris, he said, our family boxer died 2 weeks ago from brain cancer, was only 5 years old. And 2 weeks before that, our other boxer, who was only 7 years old, died of brain cancer as well. And he said, I kept saying to him, Occam's razor, the most obvious thing's probably the answer. And now he finally believes me, as far as our water being contaminated. And the technician who was with us there said to us afterwards, I moved here from Kentucky a couple years ago. I've been in this business for 20 years. Barely ever saw a dog or an animal with cancer in Kentucky. Came here, and this is a daily occurrence. So I mean, we're a little bit off topic here, but this is important stuff. Check ewg.org. Make sure that you're drinking water that's not contaminated with these chemicals. And, like you said, sugar feeds cancer. There's also a train of thought that some forms of cancer are parasitic in nature. And so a simple example would be fluke worms. So fluke worms like to eat your liver tissue, for example. And when they eat your liver tissue, digest it and pass it out, 99% of the time, that byproduct, that waste, causes liver cancer. So, there's a whole host of different drugs that I'm not going to mention because it'll get this video banned on YouTube. But there's one particular drug, starts with the letter that corresponds with what you see with, and it's very effective in treating some forms of cancer above and beyond just water contamination, like bacteria and viruses and those sort of things. So that's I'll get off that soapbox because I could speak to it for a long time. And again, this is a topic that hits very close to home for me. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Don, as far as advice for Americans based on what's transpired in Israel and how they can increase their chances of surviving these types of attacks?
Yeah, it's just this isn't the same America I grew up in. It's a different place. We have people who hate our country. We're surrounded by those type of people. My weapon is
we've got them in government.
I know we do. And pay it. It's hard to know who to follow now as far as the news. It's all so corrupt, but we have to be able to take care of ourselves. We have to eat correctly, like you just said. We have to eat correctly. We have to take care of ourselves. We have to stay fit, arm ourselves. And there's no sense arming ourselves unless we're trained on the range, trained dry fire, trained up here, just thinking about it, visualization, situation awareness, always to look around who's around you. I'm in a parking lot right now, and I've watched every single person come in on both sides of my vehicle and behind me. And it's not distracting for me. It's just I like to know who's around me. And
100%.
we have to be like that, because if not, we're just like walking around. If people are walking around with a cell phone in their face, I mean, all they're seeing, the world through the sight. They're not seeing the whole world.
That's
They're
right.
seeing that little world in front of their hands, and they're subject to attack. And then, there's more and more criminals on the street. They don't stay in jail. You don't go to jail and stay there unless you're some Republican cause or something nowadays. But these criminals committing these crimes, coming right back on the streets, and they know they can get away with it. And the drug issues in our country now, the way the kids are getting the money for the drugs is just robbing people like us. And I'm aware of all that, and I know that can happen anytime. But I'm also very confident I'm going to win if that happens to me. And that confidence just comes from knowing that the threat's out there, and I'm aware, and I'm fit, and I can take care of myself, and I can take care of my family. And if we all thought like that, it'd be a much safer place.
I don't disagree, Don. So we'll end with a shameless plug simply because you mentioned, whose information should you trust? Who should you follow? Those sort of things. So we have Survival Dispatch Insider memberships. People can join for $1.99 for the first month. And we have private, uncensored forums for our members. They're not accessible by big tech or anybody else. And so there's a constant discourse of information there, so intelligent people can make up their own mind. They're not only getting one side of the story from big big tech, mainstream media, Big Brother, so on and so forth. There'll be a link down below for people to check out Survival Dispatch Insider memberships. And Don, look forward to having you back the next time.
Thanks so much, Chris, and thanks for all you do and informing the public like you do. It's a great thing what you're doing for our people here.
Take that as a tremendous compliment. Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Chris.